Heavyweight. Joe Frazier was one of the most avoided heavyweights who ever lived. Muhammad Ali, after 3 fights with him, called Frazier the hardest puncher he ever faced and the toughest opponent of his life. George Foreman knocked Frazier down 6 times across 2 rounds in their 1973 title fight in Jamaica, and still came away saying Frazier was the only man in boxing who genuinely scared him. Foreman said it on the Johnny Carson show while discussing Frazier.
I remember Joe Frazier. He was the toughest guy I'd ever seen.
He said he remembered watching Frazier hit a man so hard, the man turned his back, and from that moment, he kept thinking he wanted to be champion of the world, but he hoped Joe Frazier died before he had to fight him. Even though Foreman beat Frazier twice, he still carried that fear. Deontay Wilder carried the heaviest right hand in the division for over a decade. Luis Ortiz, a composed southpaw who hurt Wilder in their first fight and nearly stopped him in the 7th round of that fight, described Wilder's right hand as more powerful than anything a person could imagine. He compared it to a whip, long arms snapping through the target like Thomas Hearns. Ortiz had felt it firsthand twice and kept that opinion after both fights. Tyson Fury went further. After Wilder put him down twice in their first fight in December 2018, in the 9th round and again in the 12th, Fury described the punch as the type that people do not wake up from. Cruiserweight. Oleksandr Usyk unified all 4 major cruiserweight titles, won the Ring Magazine Championship, and the division's top names consistently found ways not to face him. When he moved up to heavyweight and knocked out Anthony Joshua in front of 66,000 people in London in September 2021, Joshua's team had spent months trying to delay the mandatory fight, with promoter Eddie Hearn chasing a Tyson Fury bout instead. The WBO rejected the delay and ordered the match. Tyson Fury, who would eventually face Usyk himself in 2024, had called him a fighter not worth his time as recently as 2020. Fury then refused to engage in a stare-down at their pre-fight press conference. Usyk's message to him was 9 words: "Don't be afraid, I will not leave you alone." Jai Opetaia has 30 wins, 23 knockouts, and no losses, and the cruiserweight division has spent the last 2 years finding reasons not to fight him. He won his first world title against Maris Briedis in 2022 with a broken jaw on both sides and refused to stop. Richard Riakporhe was ordered by the IBF to face him as mandatory challenger and pulled out of the purse bid. Mateusz Masternak pulled out as mandatory. Instead of fighting Opetaia for undisputed, Gilberto Ramirez vacated his titles and moved up to light heavyweight. Light heavyweight. In 20 professional fights, Artur Beterbiev never once heard the final bell. He held 3 of the 4 major light heavyweight titles before unifying the division, and Dmitry Bivol, the WBA title holder who had gone years without a voluntary unification, called Beterbiev the most dangerous fighter in the world in 2020 and repeated it in 2024 in the lead-up to their first fight. Bob Arum, Beterbiev's promoter, admitted in 2023 that he was not pursuing the Bivol unification, a fight between 2 unbeaten champions at the same weight, citing the conflict in Ukraine. The fight took place in October 2024, only after both fighters had run out of other options. Dmitry Bivol spent years unable to get voluntary challengers at light heavyweight. His management told ESPN in 2019 that they went through numerous options and most simply did not want the fight. Canelo Alvarez moved up 2 weight classes to challenge Bivol in May 2022, lost a unanimous decision, and never came back. Bivol's manager, Vadim Kornilov, said Canelo switched broadcast networks specifically to complicate negotiations for a rematch, and added that Bivol was the last fighter Canelo wants to fight. As of 2026, 3.5 years after the fight, the rematch has not happened. Super middleweight. David Benavidez was the WBC mandatory challenger at super middleweight for 3 straight years and never got the fight. Canelo Alvarez dismissed him publicly, said he had accomplished nothing, and took Jaime Munguia and Edgar Berlanga instead. Benavidez's team said Canelo turned down $150 million to take the match. Benavidez said afterward, "I did everything in my power to make that fight happen. I was #1 contender for 3 years, but had my hands tied." Terence Crawford, who beat Canelo in September 2025, said the avoidance came down to one thing. Canelo knows how big Benavidez is going to be when he steps into the ring. Caleb Plant spent the build-up to their March 2023 fight insisting the fear narrative was overblown and that he had no problem with Benavidez's power. Benavidez outlanded him 180-68 in power punches and stopped him in the 11th round. Middleweight. Gennady Golovkin knocked out 23 opponents in a row and went nearly a decade without a fight going the distance. Matthew Macklin, who fought him in 2013, said most of the fighters who agreed to face Golovkin only did so because of the payday. Most of the guys who fought him got the biggest payday of their career because that was the only way they would agree to fight him. They otherwise wouldn't have gone in that direction. Macklin also described what made Golovkin's punches different from anyone else he faced. Normally when I take a punch, I don't think much of it. With Golovkin, it was completely different. He makes you think about every punch you receive. It stings you. It hurts badly. If I ever got the call to spar him again, I'd think about it for a few seconds and then probably say no. Miguel Cotto paid Golovkin $800,000 in step-aside money in 2015 to fight Canelo Alvarez instead, then had the WBC strip him of the belt rather than face Golovkin afterward. When Canelo and Golovkin finally agreed to fight, the bout had been delayed for 2 years. Chris Eubank Jr. spent the better part of a decade as one of the most avoided fighters in British boxing. Avni Yildirim, ordered to fight him as mandatory challenger, showed up to the press conference and his manager nearly came to blows with Eubank's camp. Eubank stopped him in 3 rounds. The 2022 fight with Conor Benn was cancelled after Benn tested positive for a banned substance before it took place. Benn's decision on all 3 cards. Super welterweight. Terence Crawford became the first male boxer to win undisputed status twice in the 4-belt era, and he did it at 2 different weight classes. At welterweight, he spent years unable to get the biggest names in the division to face him on equal terms. Crawford said Jaron Ennis and Virgil Ortiz Jr. both avoided a shot at his WBO title when opportunities were available. After Crawford stopped Errol Spence in the 9th round in July 2023 to become undisputed at 147, the IBF ordered him to face Ennis as mandatory. Crawford exercised the Spence rematch clause, the IBF stripped him, and Ennis was elevated to full titleist without ever having to fight Crawford. When Crawford moved up to super welterweight, Spence said he would only take a rematch at 154, not 147, the weight at which Crawford had already beaten him. Eddie Hearn had said as early as 2021 that Spence was preparing to move to 154 specifically to avoid the Crawford fight. The two never met at super welterweight. Welterweight. Paul Williams stood 6 feet 2 inches tall with a reach that belonged in the heavyweight division and competed at welterweight, super welterweight, and middleweight. He beat Antonio Margarito for the WBO welterweight title in 2007 when Margarito was considered the most feared man in boxing. Then spent the next 5 years watching the division's top names find reasons not to face him. Miguel Cotto avoided him. Manny Pacquiao's promoter Bob Arum steered Pacquiao toward Margarito in 2010 instead of Williams, a move Williams' own promoter publicly called a mistake. Williams said flatly that Floyd Mayweather would not fight him. Bleacher Report ran a piece at the time calling him the most avoided fighter in the welterweight division. He went 39-1 across those years and never got either of the 2 biggest fights available to him. Ryan Garcia built a reputation as one of the most dangerous punchers at lightweight, a fighter whose right hand had finished opponents at every level.
I was nervous.
You're gonna feel right away.
Huh?
You're gonna feel right away.
I'm a what?
You're gonna feel it right away.
When his brother came in, he told me, like, you gonna feel it. I said, what? But I heard what he said, though. I kept asking him, like, what? I was nervous.
Gervonta Davis admitted before their April 2023 fight that the footage of Garcia knocking people out had made him nervous going in. Davis still enforced a 10-pound rehydration clause in the contract, capping Garcia at 146 pounds on fight night, despite their contracted weight of 136. Garcia had come down from 140 to take the fight. Davis knew exactly what he was doing with that clause. Lightweight. Shakur Stevenson is the hardest fighter to hit in boxing, according to CompuBox. A 3-0 with 11 knockouts before moving up to junior welterweight. ESPN ran a piece calling him arguably the sport's most avoided fighter, and Stevenson himself put it simply, some fighters are not willing to look ridiculous in front of the world just for a check. Devin Haney was the WBC's #1 contender, and instead made a long-planned move to 140 pounds for a December 2023 title shot, rather than face Stevenson. William Zepeda resisted negotiations for months before the WBC ordered the fight under a purse bid deadline, then entered the ring predicting Stevenson would run. Stevenson beat him by unanimous decision in July 2025. After the Zepeda win, WBO lightweight champion Abdullah Mason won his title and called for Stevenson immediately. Stevenson responded by saying Mason was not ready, that he got hit too much in his title win, and that there are levels. Critics pointed out that Mason had 20 knockouts in 20 fights and had just outshined Devin Haney and David Benavidez on the same card. Stevenson then vacated the WBC lightweight title in early 2026 to Lopez, leaving the division without a unification fight that fans had waited years to see. Bantamweight. Naoya Inoue, known as the Monster, did not win any vacant titles on his way to becoming undisputed at bantamweight. He took every belt directly off the champions who held them. Mike Tyson called him the most ferocious fighter in boxing, pound for pound.
Hey, look up this young fighter called the Monster. Japanese fighter called Monks.
And said watching him reminded him of himself in his prime. Nonito Donaire, a 4-division world champion who had beaten elite competition across 15 years, called their first fight the toughest of his career and came back for a second one. Stephen Fulton came in as unified super bantamweight champion, undefeated, and spent the months before the fight dismissing Inoue's power. I feel like the power is not going to matter to me. The power may matter to the fans because they looking at the records. He was stopped in the 8th round. Marlon Tapales held 2 titles at super bantamweight and was stopped in 10 rounds in December 2023. Luis Neri was a former 2-division champion with one of the hardest punches in the division, had been banned from fighting in Japan after missing weight years earlier, received special permission to compete against Inoue, and was stopped in 6 rounds at the Tokyo Dome in front of 45,000 people. Inoue has since moved to featherweight, with no one willing to follow him up from either division he left behind. That's my list of the most feared boxers. Did I miss anyone? Drop your picks in the comments.